Hello there, friends. I'm Alan Eicholtshift Donofrio.
And I'm Austin Visions Neal.
And this is the Defuse. Welcome back for all of you fans out there of not only the show, but of course the Call of Duty League. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's get this fuse lit as we've got, again, so many games to talk about, Austin. I don't even know how we fit all of these games into one show. It really seems like a miracle, I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah, I mean, we got to see like some crazy things happen so far on the day, and it's like there was a lot of close matches, right? So I mean, it's going to be hard to get it all in here on the day, like you said. But there's a lot of interesting talking points. This has probably been one of the most exciting days I think that I've gotten to watch quite in a while here within the CDL. So it's going to make for some good talk, and I imagine some good banter as well.
Well, like I would tell my mom when I was 6 years old, we'll try to keep this brief. Let's get into this. We're going to have Atlanta versus Toronto up first, and you're very appropriately rocking your Toronto purple. So I wonder which way you're going to want to talk about this one, as we've got ourselves again another really nice one here. As we thought for a second that maybe that this would be a potential upset, and little did we know it would be that, as Toronto would be able to find a way to sneak this one away pretty nicely with a 3-2 win.
This is pretty incredible, right? Like, we have not seen Toronto be able to take down a top team really so far in the year, right? It's really been them just taking down these middle of the pack teams, showing some kind of signs of light, and trying to build off of that. And we always talk about, especially as the Toronto fans here, saying, all right, this is the time, this is the event. Well, this is the event. All right, we got it. It's looking good right now, and I think the meta is looking perfect. There was a lot of changes though that I think that came in towards that, this entire roster. They subbed in Classic after what Metals had was a couple of maybe just I think maybe not consistency that happened throughout the last event for them, but they still overall looked a lot better. That was obviously at the back end of Kleenex. They make another roster change, and I think they look even better. So I'm just seeing nothing but improvement so far here from this squad. And I mean, that obviously shows a lot of signs of light. And I mean, this obviously went the distance, went all the way to a game 5 for us, Alan. And it was a roller coaster of a ride the whole way through.
Well, here's the good news. And this is, I think, the best thing you could take away for this Toronto Ultra team was that they kept their first hard point close. They have that incredible bounce back on what was the Gunrunner. They were down at one point like 160 to 120, 110, and they finished the game 250 to 183 as they play almost a near flawless rotation spanning from the second hard point all the way back around to the second hard point again. That's incredible. But beyond that, they take both Search and Destroys versus an Atlanta FaZe squad that we know has been maybe a little bit more of a checkered past in Search over the last couple of weeks. But still, the fact that, again, this is a team that ranks right in the middle of the pack across everything, the fact that they're able to put together that kind of a comeback versus a good Atlanta FaZe team on hardpoint and then take both Search and Destroys, I think really speaks volume to how good this Toronto Ultra team is just based off of a simple weapon meta swap.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of factors that come in towards this. First off, I think bringing Classic back in was a really good option. I had talked about a little bit of how, you could maybe argue that Classic could be in towards the mix, Brack could be in towards the mix. The question was, who would you put in substitute for them to get back into the roster? Well, it looks like the answer was take out Metals just due to the lack of inconsistencies, again, due to, I think, Search and Destroy in particular, but they looked way better in that game mode. And well, they also made sure it did not go to round 11. I said, Alan, they're going to win this map 5 as long as it does not go to around 11. I was very happy to see them close it out in round 10. Cutting it a bit close, but nonetheless, we'll take the win for sure. However, I think that there was also some great things for, as far as, like you said, like the meta really fitting in towards their playstyle and their roster a lot more. Bance in particular looked a lot more comfortable, man. He has obviously been lights out within Search and Destroy pretty much the entire year for Toronto Ultra, but I think just within the response, like Bance was showing up and he was able to play it just a little bit slower. The pacing seemed to fit them a lot better, and they used the back end of Classic and Kleenex being their leading charge for as far as their sub players to be able to find these breaks, and it just seemed like everything was just piecing together perfectly. And this is setting up to be what is going to be maybe even their first finals appearance heading in towards tomorrow on Championship Sunday. But there is really just so much to talk about. But that map 4 in particular, where they were able to get a perfect rotation all the way from P3 back to P2 to close out the game, beat Atlanta FaZe. They only let up 25 points over, of course, I think it was a 5 hard points, which is
insane.
It's insane against Atlanta FaZe, right? Like, I mean, Atlanta FaZe is one of the best teams at breaking hills, or maybe you could argue that they were the best teams at breaking hills, and they were being so good at finding these pinch angles. And I think teams are finally catching up, starting to realize how they play. And I mean, I think Toronto Ultra here countered them perfectly, especially in that map.
I think as well with that, we hear, I think Nameless especially talking a lot about it's so hard to be an SMG player in this current meta because you're
Sure.
used to setting up for things like pinches, but now instead of you facing up against another SMG who's picking up the pinch for the other team, you're usually looking at down the smoking barrel of a gun of an M4 who's watching that angle. So things become a lot more difficult. And let's be honest, for Atlanta FaZe, their gunrunner hardpoint has been a little bit cloudy. I mean, they've played it a ton, 17 times in total, and over the last 11 games they've played it 11 times. If you want to go back to 15 games in the past, they've played it 13 of those 15 times. So they've played the map a lot, but they have not really found the same kind of success that you would anticipate considering the rehearsal they put into it. So it's just been kind of strange to see Atlanta kind of go back and forth on that map specifically. But we have to move on because there's a lot to talk about. So for Chicago going up against New York, I was personally very excited for this matchup. I know Proper was as well when it came down to the potential of this matchup going the distance. And well, they'd be right. It went the distance and it nearly saw New York finding themselves a reverse sweep as they were able to bounce back on a double dose of Hackney for map 3 and map 4 after Chicago again looked absolutely nasty on the Ramaza Search and Destroy. The same kind of semblance on the map 5 Gunrunner would hold true as Chicago takes both Search and Destroys after they were able to have, again, a nice start in the hard point on the Ramaza 252.19 there. And the big question mark at this one wasn't necessarily would Chicago look clean, but would we get a consistent New York? And the biggest problem so far in my mind is that Temp continues to have hot and cold streaks in the middle of series.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a cold start. That is for certain, right? I mean, he was on the struggle. And there was a point in time where he was 2-12. And I mean, obviously, not that everything comes down to the KD, but we know that if you're only putting up 2 kills heading in towards the 4th or 3rd hill, well, that is not good, Alan. That's not good at all. So it was definitely one of those cold starts. I think that happened there for New York, but they did relatively keep it close despite a couple of their players, I think, underperforming, which means that if they start off that series hot, we said, well, maybe this is a 3-1 for New York. Maybe this is just even a momentum they carry in towards the Search and Destroy where they close things out with a potential 3-0. But on the opposite side of things, Chicago, we have not seen in quite a while. We remember when we went back to a couple of events before when we saw Pristini in towards the roster. And now it seems like after a couple of reps, after a lot of practice, they definitely look a lot better here, a lot more synergized, a lot more focused, a lot more coordinated, everything you could possibly throw in for any adjectives. It seems like they are most certainly at a point where they're looking very lethal, and Search and Destroy in particular. Like they have been pretty good in Search and Destroy, I think, the entire year, but they look a lot more tightened up when they're making their plays, right? It's a small attack that's coming into play. I imagine it's probably off the back end of Pristini also being in towards the mix here, just also kind of allowing them to be in this honeymoon phase still. That is most certainly paying off. I think the only thing that this squad needs to do here is the Huntsmen just need to tighten up, I think, some of the respawns a little bit more like they were going back to off the beginning of the year where they held a very high percentage within hardpoints in particular. And if they can get back towards that hardpoint form as well as keeping their Search and Destroy form on point, this is going to be a very scary Chicago Huntsmen heading in towards these last couple of months.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, especially with Pristini when it comes down to how he's been able to kind of take this new meta and how it's really changed up his entire play style. One of my biggest concerns when Pristini was initially added to this roster was there were so many moments when he played for Florida where he would just go rogue and do his own thing, and you would find him completely on the other side of the map from where the rest of his team is. And that kind of showcased itself, especially I would say more in the domination than the hard point, but also a little bit of the Search and Destroy when he was initially added to the Chicago Huntsmen. But now that he's rocking this third M4 for the majority of map mode combos, he's slowed down a lot and is putting up performances that might start to lend you to think about him in an MVP caliber type of way. You know, now that Envoy and Scump are essentially, I hate to say it, but they're forced to kind of slow their roll as far as what they're able to do individually because they are the MP5 players here.
Yeah.
Now you're looking at who are the guys that are the flex players out there that can run the MP5 when absolutely needed, but can be that aggressive M4. And Pristini has absolutely showcased that he can fill that spot. And speaking of some of the hard point, I know that we look at what they've done over the last 2 games saying, oh, okay, they're only 2-2 overall. But here are the last 3 losses over the last 3 weekends that they've had. 192, 250, 201, 250, and I missed my last one. Where'd it go? 243 to 250. Those are all very respectable score lines, essentially saying that one thing doesn't go wrong, maybe one mistake doesn't happen, you probably win those maps. So it's just been interesting to see Chicago kind of take this meta and turn Pristini into a potential superstar for this roster of 5.
Yeah, and I mean, there was also one of the search and destroys. I think it was the second map where they had started, and him and Envoy were like 12 kills combined, 3 rounds
Dude.
in, right?
Insane.
Like, and I mean, when you have two of your players that are able to perform like this, I mean, it is quite spectacular, and it obviously does so much for the roster. And Pristini's always been, I think, a wild card, and for the most part, a lot of people didn't give him the credit that he deserved coming off of a champs win where he was overshadowed from people like Clayster, who had a
Absolutely.
stellar performance. People like the Tiny Terrors for Abizi and Simp, who obviously were phenomenal and are still phenomenal heading in towards this Modern Warfare season. But he's been overshadowed quite a bit, even by his twin brother, I think, for the majority of his career. So it's really nice to see that Pristini can still absolutely show up at any given point in time. And especially with the assault rifle, things look a lot more comfortable. And if you can get Pristini in this comfort zone and keep him here, this Chicago roster, again, is going to be on the up and up. And I think that they're absolutely going to be able to continue to show how dominant they are heading in towards tomorrow, as well as the rest of the year. So everything seems to be coming together for this squad as well, very similar to kind of my points around Toronto Ultra. So I think that everything that comes in, if they can just keep this up heading in towards tomorrow, which will be the key thing, is consistency. And well, more in particular, can Pristini keep this consistency going? If he can show us that, then who knows where this Huntsman squad is end up going here before we get to the end.
I'll hold on to this one just for a moment, but I think that entire matchup between them and Atlanta is going to be depicted between Pristini versus Simp. I hate to kind of lay that one out there, but the roles that they play, it really kind of feels like that might be the case. But of course, that ends our qualifier matches to start. We got to talk elimination matches. Who's going to get DFR'd this time around for the New York home series? Well, we would start things off with Paris versus the Los Angeles Guerrillas. And I will say I was extremely confident that there is no way that the Guerrillas were going to have a problem with Paris based on how they looked yesterday. Oh, how wrong we would be, as this would be Paris sneaking away a Ramaza hardpoint 250-228, and then around 11 after Shocks has a clutch 1v2 to secure the Petro search. And then things would close out as Los Angeles Guerrillas, again, not the strongest domination team. Well, okay, let's be candid here. They are the worst domination team statistically in the league. They wouldn't find a way to get a win on the Petro Dom. And well, I'll tell you, I could not have been more surprised to see this Paris Legion team find a way to get a 3-0 against what looked to be, over the last now week and we'll say a day, a very good LAG squad since Spence has re-added to the roster.
Yep, Saints gets added in. Things look a lot more pieced together. And I think it was actually kind of wild that they ended up pulling off the 3-0, because on St. Petro Dom, they were actually 0-4 heading in towards that particular map at game mode. So the fact that they came out on top with that, got the win, and were able to do it in a comeback fashion. Because if you remember the start of that game, like, it was not looking great. We were thinking when we were talking, of course, watching it live, we're like, oh, this is looking like a GG. We're going to see a map 4, because I think it was 49-9 at one point in time, just about 2 minutes
something
towards
like that,
the map,
yeah.
right? Like, there was 3 cap that came in towards that map just about right away. So things were really not looking great for them. Looked like we were on par to maybe even get a longer series, go all the way towards the distance, but they were able to bring things back. And when we heard the comms, I think that was what was really, I think, surprising to me in particular, was that this Paris Legion squad, obviously in last place, the worst team within the CDL statistically at the moment here for us, but they were still able to keep a really calm, collective type of communication here throughout the entire squad, despite being completely dominated for the first start and not having, obviously, the start that they wanted to have in towards a map that they have not looked very good on so far in towards the year. So I'm not saying that this Paris Legion squad's going to come out of nowhere and start smacking teams, obviously, but I think that it is something to definitely look at for as far as a red flag for LAG, and think about, all right, what are they going to have to maybe look at doing here over the coming weeks to make sure that they get back on form, where things obviously were looking a lot better for them. It just seemed to a lot of clutch factors that came in from Shocks, from Kismet in particular, in the respawns, where he was just doing Kismet things like he was doing at the beginning of the year on LAN in particular, where they were finding a lot more success. So LAG obviously going to have to really go back, I think, bond review some of these games and try to fix things up. Because that is not the team or that is not the placing that Devils want to be able to get here this far in towards the season against a 12th place team.
Yeah, I think that they would have had, after, again, the last matches before they played Paris were 2 very close sets versus the Atlanta FaZe. And one of them came immediately after they beat the Chicago Huntsmen. And they nearly beat the Florida Mutineers before that. Like, they've played a lot of high caliber teams at the top of the rankings right now, and they've played them all close or beat them. But then you get 3-0'd by the Paris Legion, and you start to, again, kind of creep that conversation back into the mix of, is there enough juice in this LAG squad to get them to start upsetting teams, not consistently, but just the potential of them doing that at all? Because now you're looking at this LAG squad, who we thought for sure after their last couple of outings, again, versus top teams, that they could be able to beat teams like maybe Toronto, Seattle, Paris, Optic, maybe the London Royal Ravens, maybe the Minnesota Rocker. But now you get 3-0'd by Paris. You're stuck after the weekend just on 50 points, which is good enough for dead last in a tie with the Seattle Surge currently. And now the season looks like it might just be a little bit too out of reach because all of a sudden Paris with this win are tied with Optic at 70 points overall. So that is good enough to potentially be a top 8 squad. It just feels so strange. The surge that we thought that we were going to see, not the Seattle team, but this little progress meter that we've seen kind of fulfilled by the Los Angeles Guerrillas, it's not going to mean anything because they're still going to be finishing probably with a bottom 4 finish overall.
Yeah, bottom 4 finish that comes through. It's honestly like really difficult because I mean the LA Grillos have not really found a whole lot of success besides, really going up against some of these bottom tier teams, and they're finally trying to get themselves back in towards a form where they might be able to be a potential contestant. And I think that there's enough in this roster that's going to be able to maybe find upsets against teams heading in towards what could be COD champs. And I think there's the ability there to do it. It's just showing us that they can do it beforehand, I think, is really what's the only thing that's kind of just stopping me from putting them at a spot where I have confidence in them. And that's the biggest thing, is I don't think that there's a whole lot of confidence in towards this squad here for a lot of analysts and people around the scene in towards this Guerrilla squad. So they have some work to do. They're gonna have to fix up some things, and again, they have to really VOD review, I think. And if they can get themselves focused and look at all the mistakes that they made, I think that this is very easily fixable for a lot of the things that were happening for them, because I do think the meta actually suits them pretty okay.
I think so too.
Heading in towards these future weeks as well.
Yeah, they've got London coming up next, where their opening matchup will be against the Los Angeles, or pardon me, the New York Subliners. And they're also in a group with Paris again and the Dallas Empire. But the problem here is, again, they're at 50 points. Even if you get to the playoff on the other side of that bracket, actually, to be honest, if you make a playoff, you've got a chance to maybe get to the grand final, because the other group is OGLA in Florida and then London and Seattle. So if you can find a way to get through, maybe you could sneak away a third win in there. But this was a weekend that was a must win. You needed to win a match at least, if not make a playoff, because again, at 50 points, you win 2 of them, you're at 70. Yeah, you're in the mix to maybe sneak out of the bottom 4. But now you're essentially forced to win at least 3 matchups and hope that everybody else above you suffers. And that's just not a good spot to be. So likely a bottom 4 finish here in the standings for the Los Angeles Guerrillas. Not exactly what you wanted. Again, I won't say it was a day late, $1 short. I'll just take the day late portion, because I feel like this team actually could do work, but there's just not enough time left in the schedule for them to really make up the ground they need to. So a little bit tough there to kind of get things moving in the right direction for them at this stage of the tournament. But looking forward, another elimination matchup, another must win, you felt like, for the Minnesota Rocker, as they would go up against the London Royal Ravens. And well, this one did not nearly go as well as you thought you would, especially early, as Minnesota had a pretty tough start, falling 0-2 in the map count, concluding the fact that they got the ability to play on their best hardpoint map, which is Azir Cave. I was really surprised that got through the draft as a whole, but they weren't able to take that one. They get smoked a bit on the Arklov Search and Destroy, nearly put together a bit of a reverse sweep, but in the end, Shawnee and Wuskin lay on the pain in the Ramaza Search and Destroy to shut that hope down.
Yeah, I think going back to that first map in particular, where the lost Azir Cave, was really big question mark, because this Minnesota squad has not obviously been on the up and up as of late. They've been very stagnant, have not looked like they were at the beginning of the year. And on the other hand, I mean, you look at London, and I mean, this meta, I think, is going to suit them. I just think they need more time to be able to get towards a point where they're going to figure out some of these issues that they have with their pacing and their coordination and things along these lines. But more in towards, I think, what's really going wrong for this Minnesota Rocker squad here is, I think that they haven't necessarily made any big changes. There hasn't really been any role swaps that have necessarily come through, and they haven't changed anything new. I think an interesting point that you also brought up very early on was, well, maybe this Minnesota squad just got a very early read on towards the meta. They figured things out first before a lot of these squads. And I thought that was actually a really good take, because that almost did seem like that could have been the potential case, where we've seen a lot of these teams that started off really hot at the beginning of the season, but now have started to hit maybe the middle of the pack for the most part, because teams are starting to figure out how they play, and they haven't opted into changing up their style too much, especially within Search and Destroy. I think they've been very one-dimensional for the most part, so it's very easy to study up, look what they've been doing, and be able to find some kind of counter, or just find a lot of predictions on what they're going to be doing with this strategy. So I think that this Minnesota Rocker squad, obviously, they cannot make any roster changes. Roster locks have come through. So maybe a rule swap going in for some kind of a big change here within the roster is something that you might have to look at doing here if you're going to find any kind of success.
Look, for me, I think Minnesota's on its last breath here. I mean, you're lucky to be sitting at 120 points because they did have such a strong opening to their season. They
Mhm.
don't play at London coming up, but they do play at Toronto, which it's so appropriate that this is the final pool of teams because you've got Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Florida, Toronto obviously will be there, and then you got Minnesota Optic and Seattle. So it's like for Minnesota, your chance to prove yourself is you're in a tough spot because here's the worst news upon that bad news. Minnesota has to play up against Atlanta FaZe first. And
Yikes.
then they're in the same pool as both Florida and Dallas. Like that is the worst draw that they could have possibly got. And I mean, I'll tell you, it's just it feels like this is last legs for Minnesota. In the really, I think, kind of crippling thing about these storylines that we're trying to throw out there is the fact that this is going to completely boom your mental state as you go into playoffs, saying being there and you've won since Dallas, you've won 2 matches. And I don't see that changing going forward the next time they play at Toronto. Granted, they'll have a week to try to fix things up, but you're going up against the three, I would say, arguable, obviously, three of the best 4 teams in the game currently. So, man, I'll tell you, this is just not a good place for Minnesota to be. I mean, again, they're lucky right now to be sitting in 5th overall, the point standings, but that might be where the good news kind of comes to a close here for Minnesota as the season's starting to wrap up based on what they looked like. Yeah, you give them some credit to try to get a reverse sweep going, but that's against London. That's not even against the Chicago, Dallas, Florida, or a New York or Toronto. So this is tough beans right now, I think, for Minnesota.
Yeah, it's tough because like there's some really good individual performances still happening on the roster, and it's not like it's like everybody's just not finding kills or it's just in this rut. It really just seems like for whatever reason, they're not clicking anymore together as a unit. And yeah, that's devastating as a team that was just off to a great start, was having a chance at even maybe a couple of titles for some of these CDL homestands, just were not able to pull through in those grand finals. And yeah, you go stagnant for such a long time that maybe it is just a little bit of a mental boom factor, and you just no longer know what to do. Like, what do we do? That's a conversation that has had to have happened here amongst the squad over the last couple of events with these performances. So everything not clicking, not coming together, definitely kind of drawing some questions. But I mean, someone who I think is an honorable mention here is definitely GodRx. Like, if there was someone that was going to be able to pull this squad back together somehow, I feel like it's got to be up the back end of GodRx, who has been proven to be able to make some of those vocal shot calls in towards some of his games, has looked very consistent. I mean, he dropped the 35 bomb heading in towards map number 1, where he did like 3,700 damage. Like, the dude has been consistent despite them not having some of these great games over the last couple of events. And even in Search and Destroy, he's still, recognized as one of the best sniper rifle players within the game at the moment. So like, you have some positives to take from here. It's just, it's really just about maybe getting everybody else that's going to be able to step up their game, bring it to that next level. But I do agree with you, Alan. I think it is really hard to make an argument for the squad to be able to make some kind of a big last minute play here in the final weeks of the CDL, when they just have not had a great track record here over the last couple events.
The other thing on top of this is they, I think, fall victim to the meta change just a touch, because you figure between GodRx and Assault, those are 2 players that you 100% trust to pick up an M4 and have an impact. I 100%
Definitely.
agree with you there. But who's going to pick up that third? We saw Seam do it a little bit in the Petro, and I thought that he did really well with it. But Silly and Alex and Asim, like between those 3, it just doesn't really feel like any of them are sitting there saying that I will be that third AR. I mean, we talked about the Azir Cave. Silly was the one to pull out that growl on hard point number 5, then that cliff path, just essentially to one trick it, just to hold down that bridge. And let's be honest, he's done this twice now, and he's found limited to any value at all trying to do that. So I think we're at a point where they need to stop being a little bit too cute, and just someone's got to commit to saying, I will be this third AR now. I will play aggressive with this third AR. Maybe it doesn't have to necessarily be that I'll drop the smoke or I'll drop the trophy. You could still technically run those and be okay, but I feel like someone out of those 3 need to step up to say, I will be that guy. So everyone can kind of keep their head down, grind it out, and hopefully they can find some synergistic moments to kind of close things out. It's such a tough road for them. I mean, thank God they've got an extra week before they have to go back to the grindstone to play up against that pool that we mentioned. But things not looking all that great for Minnesota to finish off the year. And it's just such a surprise because, again, this team was in a prime position to potentially break into the top 3 as little as even a couple of weeks ago because of the point totals they were able to find. But not the case, at least obviously in the last couple, as they've come up pretty empty. Speaking of going up a little bit empty, Paris, Atlanta, we'll go into our last chance qualifiers here. I don't think we expected too much out of this one from the side of the Paris Legion, as again, the Atlanta phase, yeah, you drop a little bit of I won't say a heartbreaker, but a disappointing one earlier in the day, but you don't see a world where Atlanta loses to Paris. That would obviously not be much of a consideration as all, as Sip, Cell, and Abizi really had a trio of maps together as that trio. They popped off and really kind of stole the Gunrunner completely away. I know that little B-roll video was extremely short because there wasn't a lot to clip. It was just over, but if you blinked, you missed the entire series, it kind of felt like.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it felt like in a lot of ways, especially that search and short where BZ was just running and gunning at them like he just did not care and had no respect in the world for where any of those players could be. I mean, looking at, I think in particular, off the back end of Paris's success, it's almost come down to, I think, some of the search and destroys that they're able to clutch out for the most part. But that has more been off the back end of Luca, I think, finding some success with the sniper rifle onto maps that he can do so. Much larger ones that we do have in towards the mix here for us, which, like Arkalov Peak, like St. Petrograd, but they did play like this map 3 times so far, on the weekend. And they did look pretty good. They won it 2 out of 3, but I think FaZe was just almost just too much of a groove, and there was a big confidence issue, I think, for them, or rather a big confidence that they were able to play off of that just allowed them to roll right through Paris. You saw it from Abizi, who put up just insane numbers there for himself. Dude. And Abizi also, on the other hand, like this guy's, despite their loss to Toronto, I don't think he's actually had a bad map so far on the weekend. Like
with an MP5, Austin.
MP5, I know.
Like, come on.
So wild because we make this argument about, all right, it's very difficult to be able to run an MP5 now in this meta because you have to get yourself into positions and situations where you have to be effective from a specific range now, of course, off the change of some of the GAs coming through within the attachment. So you have to constantly put yourself into this 20 meter range on the map, which is not always easy to do.
No,
you have to usually have the back end of your assault rifles helping you get towards those spots where you can do so. So the fact that he's still putting up 30 bomb, 30 bomb, 30 bomb, very similar to what Classic has been doing for his squad, it has been very, very impressive and is not easy to do by any means.
Again, now I want to talk, because we brought this up just briefly, as far as the point standings go for the Paris Legion. You're at 70 points, I believe, now, after this weekend comes to a conclusion, which should put you in a tie with Optic Gaming LA. The good news beyond that is that Minnesota is struggling. London Royal Ravens also only found a handful of points here. They didn't really close things out as much as you thought they would, which, of course, we'll talk about here in a minute. But did you see enough from this Paris Legion squad to think that their position, not just for playoffs, but their season could still be salvageable? We talked about how Minnesota had maybe a fortunate start because they were one of the first ones to really kind of embody that 4 SMG meta early on, especially on fast-paced maps. Paris was one that kind of did the same thing. Obviously, there were a couple of heroic moments in those winning streaks they were able to find earlier on in the season, but things have not been good since then. And we had that little bit of a meme graphic that was posted about things that have happened since Paris Legion has won a series. That gets broken here with, obviously, LAG, their 3-0 victory there. But did you see enough from this Paris Legion squad, who, again, will not have the ability to bring any from their sub-roster on? Well, maybe, at least we figure, unless Phantoms makes a surprise appearance. Did you see enough to think that Paris could potentially not just win maps, but do well in playoffs at the end of the season?
I did not, Alan. I think anyone that does is reaching for the top shelf there for those cookies, and yeah, it's
cookies,
and we all do. But I mean, yeah, it's not. I don't think it is salvageable. I think just off the back end of every time we've seen them get series wins, it's had to come off the back end of clutch plays. And that's not something that you can rely on, I think, from every single member on the squad. And until you're able to form a squad together that's able to do that, I just don't think that it's looking very plausible to be able to make an argument that they're going to be able to do it just based off their LAG win, right? Because we look at LAG, we look at Seattle, these teams just aren't enough to be able to give me confidence to say, yeah, I think they're going to be able to do the exact same thing next series. And I think the real test was going up against Atlanta FaZe to see maybe where they're at. Okay, they beat one team 3-0. It did look fairly good. A couple of clutch plays had to be made to secure it, but they still got the dub. And they made some very good comebacks that happened in that map number 3. But the same thing did not happen to FaZe. Did not look very convincing for me, I think, to say that they're going to be able to salvage their season. I think they're going to hover around where they're at, even heading in towards what could be champs for themselves.
The weird thing about this is I'm just kind of perusing through the current standings. Again, they will play again next weekend at the London home series, where they've got Dallas up first, but then they will take the loser likely, as we don't anticipate them beating Dallas, the loser of New York and LAG. So potential to match up against LAG again, which could be favorable. But if they were able to sneak into maybe the 8th position, that would have them playing up against the number 5 team, which is the Minnesota Rocker. So like that's not bad. Like
That's not. That's
you
fair.
take those, like as far as like being able to get an opening first round where maybe things are a little bit easier for you. At least I think that's the way that bracket work out. I don't know for sure, but there's the potential of them playing up against like a Minnesota Rocker or a London Royal Ravens first. And that could be definitely a positive for them, considering that that's a pretty fortunate draw up top. But speaking of things going on with the London Royal Ravens, they obviously had a chance to try to get into playoffs here as they would play up against the New York Subliners in our final last chance qualifier of the game, and of course our most recent matchup that we were able to see. And although things looked good off the start for London, they come out with Shawnee having another massive lead early for the Gunrunner hardpoint. Scrap still looking incredible with the AR. They take the Gunrunner, but then from there on out, it was New York saying, we'll take it from here, boys, as they take the round 11. Temp popping off in that round 11 for 4 out of the 5 kills. And then from there on out, the Hackney Dom pretty easy for them, and the Hackney Hardpoint kind of the same thing. As there were so many moments that we were watching the respawns, you go, how the heck are London still even in the mix of this map? As Zero had an absolutely atrocious start, but still were able to send things to a third rotation of hills before New York would lock down that Hackney Yard hardpoint and lock down the series 3-1.
This is another heartbreaker for London, right? Like, I mean, how many
Yeah.
times have they gotten this close towards getting towards, the championship Sundays, getting close towards getting towards the grand finals and just falling short? I think up the back end of before, when we were in the different meta, it was because there's some of their pacing issues within the submachine gun play in particular, where it just seemed like everyone couldn't keep up with Dylan. However, I think that now this London squad probably can look to fix things a lot more easier just due to the meta change, because Shawnee was on one today.
Yeah, he was
man.
on one today, man.
Really
was.
good. And I mean, you could just go scroll through Reddit for the last couple of months and you could just see probably people ripping him apart because, to be fair, he wasn't performing that well. But today, man, he looked a lot better with the assault rifle. The pacing is there. Shawnee is an AR player. When he's able to slow things down and just worry about snapping left or right on his screen and not having to worry about that crazy movement and keeping up with these insane SMGs that we have in towards a lot of these lineups for the CDL, things just look to be a lot easier for him to be able to find kills, to be that more effective on towards the map. That's what we saw today. Not only that, though, he looked so good in the search and destroys as well.
Yeah, he
right?
looked incredible in the search.
On map number 2, I think it was like a 13 bomb, 14 bomb, something along there. He put up just insane numbers. Construction was his, like Maven said on stream, right? Like it was his zone, and he locked it down. He had the blueprints. He had everything he needed to be able to get themselves the win. So that was the big factor for me, I think, coming in towards this series. So with a little bit of time and a little bit more scrim practice, I think that London will actually look a lot more on form heading into the rest of the year. I think that's really my big takeaway based off what I've seen today, despite them losing in a very unfortunate fashion with the back end of a crazy shot call play from New York running in towards A.
Yeah, and you brought it up in that whole kind of segment when you were talking about, we talked about this last time we were on the show, when it came down to London and their pacing problems. And it was mostly from the fact of, how are you going to get these 3 SMGs to match styles with one another? And now it's not necessarily the SMGs that's on par, but again, we talked about how Dylan likes to get aggressive. He likes to kind of play as, quote unquote, he still has a grapple in his back pocket to use, like he was playing in Black Ops 4. But now that you're running more ARs, like you mentioned, where you've got players like Shawnee who likes to play a little bit more stationary, a little bit slower, but you've also got Scraps who's picking it up and looking very good with it, and Wusket as well. It really just feels like, what are you going to do to get your front line and your back line on the same page? Because there were so many moments in that Hackney Yard domination we were watching, was like, London is not playing the middle of the map at all. They weren't even touching it. And that's one of the reasons, New York was just rotating through the OE, essentially completely under cover of darkness, because no one was scouting it out. And it led to an extremely scrappy B warehouse where, again, you felt like Dylan wanted to play more aggressively than the rest of his team did. And I agree with you. The problems that we talked about with London when it came to their pace are going to be easier to fix in this current meta compared to if they were running 3 or 4 SMGs on certain maps. The fact that now you're looking at 2, if not 3 ARs for the majority of respawn maps, I think will give them the opportunity to essentially give Dylan the Pristini treatment of saying, all right there, bud, slow down just a touch, slow your roll. Let's see if we can kind of hit something together and get these ARs in a position. But at the same point, now that I'm kind of saying this out loud, I'm also kind of thinking on the fact that these third ARs that we're seeing out of teams, you're seeing players like Simp pick it up. You're seeing players like Prestini pick it up. You're probably going to see players like Pharaoh/Awakening to pick it up. All of those you characterize as being aggressive players. When you talk about Scraps, Wuskin, and then you talk about Shawnee, none of them really hit me as an aggressive AR. Scraps is going to have to be that guy. I think he's got to be the bridge to this gap here currently between that SMG Live London and that more stationary backline that we're getting out of the ARs.
Yeah, I think that's probably what they're going to have to lean to. I think Scraps is going to have to fill that gap. But I think more importantly, when you look at it like a meta change that we have here, which is obviously, a very big learning curve for a lot of these teams, you're having to almost relearn the game in the sense of how you're looking to play some of these fundamentals and some of these respawns. And when you think about that pacing issue, it's like, okay, they don't have middle map control. But if you look at the way that they used to play through middle map control, which is 2 subs hitting it, looking for baiting and switching, maybe you have your AR posted top heaven, moves over towards green, tries to get you some kind of control so that you have someone looking over you from range. AR not simply picking you off. That's obviously done a lot different now. It's like, okay, I can't push up the middle of the map until my AR is in position, which means that you have to kind of wait that extra 3, 4, 5 seconds, whatever it might be, before you can get yourself in towards hit, which is obviously the problem that we mentioned that Dylan currently has. And it's really getting everybody else on that same page where it's like, all right, we can hit things now that we have somebody in this spot so that we can move up. So I think there's a lot more coordination, a lot more communication that also comes in, which I also think is a downfall that's not really talked about. When you go with a lot of these listen-ins, I think the majority of the CDL teams actually have pretty clear comms for the most part, except for when things get hectic and you're coming down to the final moments of a hard point and everything's just, the emotions just flowing, the call-outs are there, you're trying to get the win, right? That's the only time I think we've really seen a hectic call-out that's come through. But when you go on board with the listen-ins with London, man, I know it's like they're from EU, so it's hard for us to even understand what they're saying, but I'm just like, dude, what in the hell is going on in the comms right now? And I don't know if maybe they have that talk out or if that's something that they also have a problem with, when they are in some of those respawns. But it seems like things get too hectic and they don't calm things down enough. And I wonder if they can actually maybe work on their communication, if that will maybe even play a factor in helping them kind of flow a little easier on the maps that they're playing.
And I will say this much to kind of finish off the point on London is when you watch Scraps with this M4, I almost wanted to throw in the kind of talking point of, can Scraps hit MVP form with this M4? Because he really has blown up over this weekend with that M4. A lot of the maps that have been complete blowouts in favor of London have mostly come in factor of what we just talked about. The fact that you've got Scraps that are having incredible performances. So that's kind of one of those things of why I look to him to see if he could potentially be that guy to take this team to the next level. But I think the communication issues as a whole are one of those things that I think, again, like you mentioned, we don't talk a lot about. The same thing can be said about Minnesota as well. When we had the one listed with Minnesota, their comms were all over the place. And it didn't really sound like there was someone taking control of what was happening, what the plays were setting up for their respawn. So it's one of those things that, again, I think that you're right when it comes down to making a move where, again, they're going into a weekend of their own home series where they should make the playoff. They play Seattle first, and then they're in a group with Florida and Optic. They should make the playoff that weekend, if not potentially getting to a grand final, because this is going to be a little bit of a softer weekend when it comes down to what the caliber of opponents that are in there. So there's potential, I think, for London to make a grand final here in this next weekend to finish off their regular season on top, at least for them, at a high note. But I think there are some things that need to be worked on. And again, not a lot of time to work on it.
Yes.
Before we go on into our playoff picture, I just want to remind you guys that we are taking viewer questions for you guys. And if you submit your question to this Twitter link that I believe if you type !giveaway, you'll get a link to, you will find the ability to potentially get 5 free Checkmate gaming credits. If we pick your question on the show, you will get added on Twitter. We will send you 5 credits. Pretty easy way to get some CMG credits. If you're looking to do some Warzone challenges or get some search and destroy in tonight, you could be doing that on us, essentially. You're welcome. Don't say thank you. But now that we talk playoff picture as a whole, this is interesting because, and I don't think either of us really realized it until we were about to go live, we're going to see either this New York Subliners team or the Toronto Ultra make a grand final for the first time as they're matched up in our opening matchup that we have. Or I guess it's not the opening matchup anymore. It's the second matchup of the night.
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty insane to think that one of these teams are going to be going towards the grand finals. And it's really interesting to kind of almost just look at that and look at as far as a breakdown on what we're going to get for that matchup. Because, last time we experienced Toronto Ultra up against New York Subliners, they lost in 3-1 fashion, where they were still starting to have a few of those problems within the consistency of the respawns, which I think they're obviously a lot better at at now. And again, the meta looking up and up here for the Toronto Ultra boys. But yeah, New York Subliners, I think, is almost like a sleeper team. And they're like the dark horse of almost every single home series, despite this being their own home series. I still think that they're a team that just kind of goes under the radar. But the biggest problem that we've still seen with them is like, okay, we haven't really seen them take down any of these crazy top teams, right? They've been pretty solid against these middle of the pack teams, and they've definitely shown their dominance over some of these bottom teams. But have they been able to really try to go up against, Atlanta FaZe, the Huntsmen, going up against Dallas Empire, the Florida Mutineers? Like, are they going to be able to keep up that same consistency? And are they going to be able to have, players like Zuma and Attach, who have been off the back end of finding, I think, of some crazy breaks, and that's why their hard points looked a lot better, is because they've been on form. Maybe they're hitting peak form and MVP form heading in towards COD champs, which is best case scenario for Subliners, by the way, if that can happen, as that's been the duo for such a long time, going all the way back towards, IW and maybe even before that. So those are some of the things that I'm kind of a little bit worried about for the squad. But looking at that matchup in particular, Alan, I think I got to go with my boys. I think Toronto Ultra is going to come out in a game
No.
5. It's going to go to a game 5. I mean, that's what I think is going to happen there for us. It's really up in the air, even though New York won the last one. I just think that Ultra has just proven to me that they've made this crazy roster work, this 10-man roster that a lot of people had a lot of opinions about, but I think it's actually now finally come in with, all right, this is our set 5. This is what we're going with. This is what looks good. And well, they are looking good.
Austin, do you hear that?
Is that Toronto
That's
Ultra?
the sound of nobody surprised that you picked the Toronto Ultra to win tomorrow. That's the sound of nobody surprised. No, I agree with you, though. And I think, again, you look back at their most recent matchup, it wasn't the Paris home series. It was a 3-1 in favor of New York, of which both the hard points were 200 plus to 250s. The domination was a 7-point game. The only blowout was the search and destroy, which, by the way, the Toronto Ultra just beat the Atlanta FaZe in 2 straight search and destroys. The point that I want to reiterate that you were able to make was the simple fact that the New York Subliners have not had a chance to beat a top 4 squad yet. The Toronto Ultra, up until they played FaZe today, said the same thing, but then they beat the Atlanta FaZe. I think that just based off of that alone, and again, this is kind of a battle of consistency for me, not necessarily for Toronto, because we're still trying to feel out what this roster of 5 looks like, but for New York, I'm looking at players like Accuracy. I'm looking at players like Temp. Can they stay consistent? This is a matchup that you feel like you should be able to win if you're New York, but there is something in the back of my mind that's just looking at this matchup and thinking that I feel like New York is just kind of sleeping on this Toronto team a little bit. I feel like everyone's kind of sleeping on this Toronto team, saying, "Oh, good for them. They're winning matchups." They just beat the Atlanta FaZe, pardon me, in 5 games, of which they looked completely in control throughout that search and destroy. That's a scary factor for, again, a New York team that is pretty much dictated of what they play on based on their hard vetoes. We're not going to see a Zero Cave. We're not going to see Piccadilly. We're not going to see a Petrodome. All of those things you should be able to read pretty easily if you're Toronto, and you should be able to come in prepared for this team. I've got Toronto taking this one in 5, I think, as well. On the other front, though, we would be remiss if we didn't spend at least some time talking about the matchup that everyone's been waiting for since the beginning of the year, the Atlanta FaZe and the Chicago Huntsmen. And this is interesting now because for Chicago, they, I think, are looking like the stronger team currently. But it was still a pretty scary set in there versus the New York Subliners, considering that, again, their hard point had not been necessarily convincing, and they still dropped the domination. This is a team that's been riding on their Respawn laurels. So can they find a way to make sure that Atlanta FaZe aren't feeling comfortable and make sure that they can get that same kind of prowess that we've seen so far on the search and destroy?
Yeah, so this is an interesting matchup because, like you said, we have not obviously seen it this entire year. So it is really up in the air for what we're going to get for as far as the clash. We've seen some scrims against some of these squads going up against each other, and it's been pretty even, I think, for the most part, heading in towards the year. But I do think that there is obviously a problem with hard point for as far as the Huntsman not being able to close things out. However, the same argument could be made for as far as FaZe. FaZe has not looked more as for FaZe. Good. Yeah, right. Like you have not looked as dominant for as far as what you've been doing, and I think that maybe gives Huntsman a slight advantage. Whether or not they start off the series hot or not, I don't think matters. The most important thing for me heading in towards this series is really being able to take away the search and destroys. And well, if they are going to live up to what they've been doing so far on the weekend, they're on par to do so. But this is the Twins versus the Tiny Terrors. This is going to be an absolute clash. And I mean, even in the interview today, Simp had said, like, listen, I've been looking forward to play these guys, and We know we saw Rich kind of touch on, well, why are you looking forward to play these guys? It's like, well, these are two teammates that I won champs with. We have not played against each other the entire year, and there's maybe a little bit more on the line than just making it towards a grand final, and both these teams competing for their third chip. So there is really, I think, a lot that they're going to be looking at tonight, in particular, VOD reviewing all their games today, seeing what each individual player does. But if aBeZy keeps playing like he does, I think that's going to be the only real thorn in their side coming into those respawns, because he was really just lights out, and you cannot stop talking about that because it was insane.
For me, it's that matchup between Pristini and Simp as that third AR, I think, is what I'm mostly interested in as far as like the game inside the game.
Yeah.
But on the other front, just to kind of briefly touch on it one more time, it feels like a lot of the time that Atlanta FaZe put together good search and destroy moments is because of aBeZy's finding an opening first and second kill. I don't know if he's going to get that same kind of liberty against the Chicago team, which has not just been completely in control of what they've looked like defensively. They have been throwing a ton of off-speed pitches when it comes to what they've done on offense. They've shown that they can hit extremely aggressively with good double smokes. They could bait out those same looks by saying, here's our same double smokes, but guess what? We're not playing aggressively. Come on through. They just look like they're completely in a different world than where they were previously, especially on their offense. And for me, I think that when it comes down to that tilt, I think this is all going to come down to map set. You wonder, did Chicago get enough time to go over everything? Are they just hard vetoing out one map that they don't particularly like, which you figured would be St. Petro, as they haven't played it in the last couple of weeks? But I don't know, man. It just feels like one of those things that if you're Chicago, I feel like a lot of this is going to come down to what set strategies do you have when it comes to vetoing out maps from the Atlanta FaZe, because I think a lot of this comes down to just individual matchups, kind of like a basketball coach setting up like who's guarding who. It's going to be one of those things I feel like is who's got the one-on-ones, because I think overall these teams are pretty well rehearsed across all the maps. They've showcased that. Some of the most dynamic map sets that we've seen in the CDL have been through these both two teams. So I think this really comes down to map set, but I will say I'm leaning a little bit towards Chicago based on what I've seen over the last couple of days.
Me too. I mean, like, to make like a prediction, I think that this is probably a lot of close games, obviously, but I think it probably is a 3-0 or a 3-1. I don't think it's going to go to a game 5 maybe for Chicago's sake. Hoping that it doesn't go towards a game 5. I could see a lot of like really close hard points that come in, like 250, 225, closing things out, going to the search and destroy, keeping up that consistency, then going in towards the dom, depending on what map they get, could potentially be a 3-0. But I think that they have an advantage over Atlanta FaZe. Again, adding in Pristini towards the roster is probably going to be the only question mark. Is he going to be able to match up against Simp, who Simp did look pretty good with the assault rifle? That is
very good.
He was able to still be, I think what reminded me of it was, how he was able to do things like Skies does, which is crazy close kills up close and personal in your face, finding two pieces, finding multi-kills that you just should not be getting, but are somehow getting and securing. And obviously those are off the back end of securing rotation, securing setups. And I think that if Pristini can do what he did today, then that's probably going to be the X factor. And that is probably going to be, a big question mark, because Pristini himself has been a little hot and cold over what we've seen there in the last home series. And coming in towards this one, he has to do it. And if he does, they'll win here in a probably 3-0, 3-1 fashion.
I'm going to agree with you, but also disagree with you. I think that this one absolutely has to go game 5 here. No. Simply because one of the biggest reasons why I said that is Atlanta FaZe has fixed their domination. This is a squad that over the last couple of weekends over the last 2 weekends, they've only won 3 dominations. They are now 3-0 on domination, of which they have a win on each of the 3 maps in domination in those 3 matches. The problem is I just don't think that this Atlanta FaZe team is going to beat the Chicago Huntsmen in search. I think they split the hard points. I think Atlanta FaZe takes the dom, but I think Chicago takes both searches. That's my only reasoning right there. I think each of them are going to take their map pick when it comes down to their hard point, unless Atlanta FaZe for some reason pick Gunrunner again. And then I think this both search and destroys go Chicago's with how good they're looking currently on search. That's my only little disagree but agree moment that I'll have for you there in that one, because I think Pristini has looked incredible this weekend since the meta change has happened. Okay, so we will be answering your guys' questions here on stream, so make sure if you have not already submitted a question, you get it in there. There's already a handful out there, a number of really, really good ones here, which I honestly have not had a chance to really read through. So this will be kind of a hot take as far as picking these questions in particular. How about this one from one of our friends here? Heat actually asked a good one. What are your thoughts on Rocker not making a move at the deadline after another bad result? Ooh.
Well, we talked about, who could you really bring in towards the roster, right? Like, who could you
Right.
bring in and amplify it? I do think that it was probably worth making a change because, I mean, I think we've kind of been talking about it the whole day while in call, but, every single team except for Seattle has pretty much found success here after making a change. And whether that's been, minimal success or if it's been, a lot of success, it's been at least some kind of upward success that you've been able to get. So I think that probably doing so, and at least maybe looking around, it's hard to say. Maybe they were looking around and they just couldn't get the people that they had wanted on towards the roster. And it is really kind of up in the air for what could have been happening. But there was obviously a lot of arguments being made for there's a lot of top amateur players that you could be pulled in towards the mix. How much scouting were they really investing into someone that we're bringing in? But I think my overall opinion was I think they definitely should have made a change heading in towards the roster. Who they sub out, I don't really know, but they probably should have, I think, done a better job. Yeah, with the whole
with his
situation,
hand
right?
problem.
Yeah, with his hand, right? That probably would have been the solution, maybe even the answer to this.
It's so tough to put all that on it because again, I don't want to ever sound like I'm putting on stuff on Alex because he actually played really well today, to be completely candid, considering. But I think the bigger problem here for Minnesota is once you were trying again, it's one of those things that at the Dallas home series, again, they made that grand final versus the Florida Mutineers. So like it's one of those things that they had the potential of winning a championship. And then they beat Florida the next time up, but then they lose a couple of heartbreakers. By the time that you start to realize that things are really starting to slip, you have the hand problem with Alex. You use your best substitute Nick Seed, and things don't pan out. And after that weekend, you're essentially at roster lock. Yeah, you have a couple of weeks off in between those, but maybe you could have trialed somebody.
Yeah.
But again, this is also you got to keep in mind a team that is affiliated with Rebel Esports in the amateur scene when it comes to their quote unquote academy team, and that academy team has not done well over the last couple of weekends. So it's just, I think it would have been a really tall ask for them to find someone. That said, do I think they should have trialed players? I think absolutely they probably should have, especially if you're considering the fact that Alex is having some hand problems. Even if he gets better, let's say he does, turn around and he's instantly better. Oh, cool. You don't lose anything by trialing players. But while you're trying to give him a rest, and maybe you didn't like what you saw from Exceed when he got his play time, again, it was last minute. So I don't know. I think you should have trialed people maybe a little bit harder just in case, like as a preventative measure, just in case things continue to go wrong. And well, obviously they continue to go wrong. But it's a good question, I think, overall. We kind of already answered this one, so we might as well just give credit to Tibium. He asked, who do you think will cause the upset, Chicago or FaZe? Because FaZe was looking dominated respawns, but on the other hand, Chicago's S&D is looking very strong, and they showed it today versus New York. This will be the first time these teams face off. It's about warfare. I think we kind of gave that answer. It's a good question, so we should give him credit for answering it. But this is a good one. I think this is actually probably one of the better questions that we've had, and it's a little, I think, softballish by the way that it's framed, but it's, I think, a good talking point at the least. This is from Ioto24. He asks, do you think this new meta is going to separate the truly elite subs? An example, Abizi has been putting up huge numbers all weekend in both Respawn and Search and Destroy, thinking that he might actually have the highest overall KD out of any player so far this event. I think the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is a really good question, actually.
It's a good talking point.
It is because I think that, we've seen just pretty much 4 subs on towards the map for the majority of the maps, besides maybe Azure Cave, heading in towards a lot of these respawns on the year. And it's like, all right, well, it's maybe kind of hard to diverse and tell because the MP5 was pretty good. Let's be honest. Like it was with a 10mm, you were able to beam M4s and you were able to do things that you probably should not have been able to do with a submachine gun. So I do think that it's going to be able to show us, listen, these are the elites from people that maybe are just mediocre or just simply were, using the back end of the 10mm to be able to have the performances that they were, because you have to obviously position a lot different. Like it's totally different as a sub player, especially someone who like myself who's transitioned towards a sub player before. And it's like you have to like position different, you have to think different, you have to put yourself into spots that's off the back end of always thinking about baiting and switching, because that's essentially your job, especially within the meta now where it's mainly assault rifles where you're the first one in. Listen, if you're the sub player, you're probably going to be the one with the most deaths on your team, but it's your job to be able to lead the charge and allow your ARs to get entry, get into power position so that you can be locking down setups, getting into spots where you're controlling and dictating the pacing of the map, where that is a lot easier said than done. And I think people like Abizi, people like Classic, are the two individuals for me this weekend that were doing that, on so many different occasions that were obviously just so impressive, because it's not easy to do that when these M4s are just beaming you from 30 meters away and you have no chance.
It's interesting that you brought up Classic. I was going to say Zuma before I'd say Classic, but
you're
Classic
right.
has been impressive this weekend. Absolutely, he's been impressive this weekend. But I think, yes, I think that you're going to see the smartest, the best SMGs in total because it's a very unforgiving meta towards subs right now, that yeah, they're absolutely going to be the ones that shine. And I think that this is actually, as far as like, if you're looking for, like, if you're a big Abizi fan, like you want him to see like MVP status, now that the MP5 is severely weakened, this is like the best argument. Like if Abizi helps Atlanta continue to win, and if they beat Chicago and win the home series in whole this weekend, I think that he instantly shoots up as far as MVP, because he's had an MVP caliber weekend all weekend long, and this isn't the first time that we've said that. Final question. This is a great one. And it's going to be a challenging one because it is a little bit loose here when it comes down to Zach asking, who's been the most consistent so far in the New York home series?
As a team, like the most consistent team.
I'm going to assume he means player.
Oh, most consistent player. That's good. I mean, we just said it, right? I think
You think Abizi's been?
I think he's had. I don't think that there might be maybe one respawn where he hasn't dropped 30 kills, but I think he's almost had, like, he has not had a bad game. He has not had a bad game. He's still getting first bloods. I think, like, if I would just had to think of a player like immediately without really going into a deep thought, like as soon as I thought about that question, I thought of Abizi like right away. And that's just based off of what he did on Friday, yesterday, what he did today. I mean, like we've talked about it so many different times. We have a lot of points on what he's been doing. This is his time to shine. This is, I think, his groove with the gun changing towards the MP5. I think we're going to continue to see him do what he's currently doing.
Man, this is a hard one because I want to agree with you just instantly, because Abizi has been, I think, probably one of the more incredible players so far this weekend. But in my mind, I actually want to go a different route and say that as far as consistency's sake was supposed to be coming through, and one player that I was looking at to see if they would stay consistent, it's Kleenex. He has played just as well this weekend in a new meta than he did last weekend. And I think you kind of saw that in that comeback on Gunrunner specifically. He was a lot of the reason why that they were able to find that major comeback versus none other than the Atlanta FaZe. So I think when it comes down to that, you know, I was most interested to see how Kleenex was going to fare after, again, he comes out and steals the show, I think, for Toronto in the most recent weekend. Would he continue to play at that level in a changed meta immediately afterwards with a couple of weeks? Will that kind of, you know, we labeled as a honeymoon period, but will that recency bias turn into a more elongated factor? I think that he absolutely has been so far. So, yeah, I think it's been really, really good here to kind of see what he's been able to do overall. And yeah, let's do one more question. This is another interesting one. We kind of talked about a little bit, but J-Dog, and a late entry here a couple minutes ago, I just refreshed and it popped up. If the New York Summerliners do not win this event, what could they change to be a more serious threat at champs? Ooh. I mean, I'll start on this one. Like, I don't think it should be an expectation that New York Subliners win this weekend. Are their chances higher? I think yes, because you're playing up against another untested playoff team in the Toronto Ultra. Not to say that matchup is favorable necessarily, completely, in saying that Toronto's not going to be able to match up, but I don't know if you change anything up completely, but I think the biggest thing of why I would see New York Subliners not winning this upcoming weekend is if you don't get a consistent performance from accuracy or temp. And I think you need to look at specifically probably Temp's role. You know, is he going to be the guy that's going to be essentially just playing the OBJ? Are you going to kind of free up Mac to roam around a little bit more? Because Mac, you got to keep in mind, at one point in time, one of the hard points, we noted that he was like 18-9 with like 2 minutes of hill time.
Yeah.
Like, would you rather have that slaying prowess somewhere more forward on the map and let Temp play a little bit more reactionary on the hill? Maybe that's something you look at. But I think that relationship is probably what you would look at first. Do you need to free up Mac to play more aggressively with that third AR?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I think a lot of it's based off of how they're able to, you know, perform up against, you know, the Toronto Ultra again. Like, I think maybe just seeing if they're able to do so, then maybe they go in towards champs. And yeah, like they're a team that has it within them. Like they're the sleeper team, this Dark Horse team that I think really goes under the radar, but it's been off the back end of them not beating in the top teams. So do they go in towards, you know, like some of the last tournaments here and pull off some crazy performances? I think it's definitely possible. Do they make any kind of a change? I don't think there's any kind of a change that has to come through here for the squad. I think that what they have going for themselves is really good. It just need to fix up these inconsistencies, which is obviously, you know, the main goal of any squad. You want to make sure that you're playing consistent every single map. It's not always the case, of course. Bad maps do happen, but bad maps happen too often, and that's just going to be punished way too much from the top teams.
And you also heard, I don't remember if it was Zoomer or Tachu at the interview because I was editing all the graphics and stuff, but they were saying that they were feeling really, really positive about their hard point when they see that full participation from the full squad. They knew that there were some communication or relationship issues when it came down to who was fulfilling what role in the midst of these rotations. And when those are clean, when they're polished, when everyone's hitting their stride, they're looking extremely scary. So I think it just comes down to just fine tuning those little moments right there, but especially in the respawns, because their search and destroys look pretty good all the way throughout. So that we'll do that as far as that'll be our last question. Again, we always run late on Saturdays because there's so much to talk about. So this will be more like an hour episode for you guys. I hope you really did enjoy. We will be back tomorrow as far as we anticipate, unless other priorities take us away. But we anticipate being back tomorrow evening to talk about the entire tournament as a whole, and maybe a new segment that'll highlight some of the top bloopers from the weekend, something we've been playing around with that I think would be really, really fun. We'll see if we have time to edit it up for you guys and insert that one in. So it'll be a lot of fun. If you did ask a question, but it wasn't answered this time around, I got apologies. We would love to take all your questions, but we don't want to be here for 3 hours because I know you guys have a lot of great questions. And let's be honest, Austin and I, we're known to talk a lot. It's just one of the things we get. I don't know. Maybe it's just like the power of like the facial hair. Although you're looking like real smooth and trimmed right now. Like,
yeah,
you're looking like real buttery. Like
I got the ring light now too, so I look a lot.
Oh,
So I had to up the game. Had to match you and proper. You guys were just showing me up for like the last half year.
I mean, as much as our green screens might be a little bit impressive, we're all internally jealous of your bedspread behind you. I don't know what year that bedspread was made. It looks like it was made in like 1975, but it's just it's a big energy, and I absolutely love it. So we got to give shout outs to the bedspread.
Oh,
We'll be back tomorrow, though. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. Again, if you missed any of the show, you can catch it on YouTube. If you're catching it up on YouTube, you can also watch it live on Twitch after the CDL matches have concluded. Till next time, though, there, friends. Hope that fuse doesn't fizzle out. And until next time, so long, later, bye-bye.